what is the biggest common mistake you see when it comes to habitat? This is not just food plots, but habitat overall on farms that you have seen over the years.
Probably everybody wanting to do shortcuts, skipping steps. Man, that fertilizer was expensive, and you do need fertilizer. I have put fertilizer down for years, but I never put any lime on. And my buddy the other day shows me a soil test, and his pH is 4.5. I'm like,
whoa.
Do you know how much lime that is going to take to fix that? It's crazy. So just skipping steps. Everybody wants to skip a step and make it an easy button, like throw and grow. I mean, and there's nothing wrong with throw and grow. I'm not saying that, but if somebody says, "Hey, what do you want to plant?" and you tell them, and they're like, "All right, here's the steps you got to take, and here's the herbicides or how you take care of the weeds," and you start skipping one of those steps, even it will break. It won't work. You can't skip any of the steps. I mean, there's no easy button for this, and there's no like, No, I get it. Like, hey, I'm going to skimp a little bit on the fertilizer because it's so expensive and things are tight. You know, it calls for 70 pounds of phosphorus and 60 pounds of potassium, and I'm going to dial that back to 40, or whatever to save a little money. I get that, and that's not going to be a deal breaker. But like just skipping steps, I didn't kill any of the weeds. I just went right into them or something. Whatever those steps are, follow them to a T. They're there for a reason, and if you leave out any of those steps, you are very likely to have a failure.
That's a good point. A lot of people will say, is this a food plot? It's just a deer plot. Do we really need to do that? Do we really need to do
Farmers
this?
do that too.
That's true.
Hey, here's my field. Look at how beautiful it is.
Uh-huh.
Yeah, I went over to your farm and helped you out. Yours looks like garbage, but it's only for deer. Who cares?
Uh-huh.
And no, you kind of got to think a little bit like a farmer. Like, you almost have to think of it like, hey, I'm doing this for production, even though you're not. Farmers don't go skip steps, the good ones at least, the ones that aren't bankrupt. They don't be like, nah, I'm not going to get rid of the weeds this year, and I'm not going to, plant my corn on time. I'll get to my corn in July. You're not, big things like that. I mean, I'm not going to have my pH right. Nobody's going to skip steps when you're farming. Well, if farmers aren't skipping steps, you shouldn't skip steps. Just because it's for deer doesn't mean the process should be different.
Mm-hmm. Okay. All right, I'm going to give you keys to a brand new farm. So we're going to work through this top to bottom. I try to think of something that is most common across the board from parcels that I've seen or have helped put folks buy or sell. So this should be good here. Okay, so I'm giving you the keys to the farm. I'm going to describe it to you. And we're going to discuss the highest impact projects all the way down to ones that can last, push it down the road here. So this farm's a 50-acre parcel. It's comprising of 40 acres of timberland, 5 acres of FSA acreage with cropping history, and then 5 acres of just kind of edge habitat to where maybe they ran cattle and now it's trees, 2 or 3, 4 inches in diameter. And then it's located in an average neighborhood. A good goal for age class is 4 to 5 years old. And the surrounding area is mixed land, a little bit of timber, and some oddly chopped up tillable tracts. The lowest hole in the bucket is up for debate, whether it's food or cover, assuming the answer may alter. So we don't really know if there is a drastic lack of cover, or we don't really know if the deer density is super high and we need a bunch of food, or however that shakes out. So the timber was cut heavily 50 to 60 years ago.
Okay.
So a high-grade cut 50 to 60 years ago. The main species in the farm are hackberry, cherry, locust. We got some maple, some shagbark hickory, ironwood. You got a few bur oak that are left and a few red oak, and you got a 10 to 12 walnut throughout the farm that are like 15 inches in diameter, and you have honeysuckle on the edges of the timber. Can you picture that in your head? There's a lot there.
Got it.
But I think that's a pretty common theme for farms across the country. So
absolutely it is.
So
that's a really good example.
So you bought this, and I want to make this the absolute best parcel possible in a realistic time frame, let's say 3 to 5 years. And so you close on this, let's say, February. First thing you're going to do?
First thing I'm going to do, if I'm a regular guy, is get a forester in there and get governmental funding and learn how to market properly. But the first thing I'm going to do is timber stand improvement right off the bat. Hopefully I bought this like in the winter, and I could get going in the winter. And if I bought it in the summer and I had to wait till the next winter, fine. But it's still like right on the top of my to-do list. And I'm going to free up every one of those oaks, make sure they're growing great, and I'm probably going to open up some areas around them where there's junk trees so they can start to regenerate. So, and that's going to give more browse. I'm going to trash the areas a little bit so there's some bedding, and I'm going to give those oaks a lot of room because there's very few of them, and I want them to regenerate. Mm-hmm. And I want them to throw out more acorns, and then that's going to just kill 4 or 5 birds with one stone with browse, bedding, regeneration, all that stuff. I'm probably going to immediately get rid of that bush honeysuckle. Stuff's just wicked. And it's easy to get rid of. I mean, even if you're doing like basal bark, like spraying the bottom part with garland, or hey, I'm going to mow them off and spray the tips, or, I mean, there's a million ways to deal with bush honeysuckle. You can look up a video, how do I eradicate bush honeysuckle? Just look that up. There's plenty. Get rid of that bush honeysuckle, because you don't want to open that forest up and have that stuff get in there. Mm-hmm. And it probably will get in there at some point. You got to watch that, but it's easy to deal with if you're watching it. Timber stand improvements first on my list, and then now we can clearly get into food at the same time, right?
Yeah, but real quick too. So even on the, let's say you were going to go in there that winter, and one of those bur oaks are on the edge where there was dense honeysuckle. Is that all at the same time? That same winter? Go in and treat all the honeysuckle, open up the canopy, then spot treat whatever honeysuckle pops back.
Yeah,
up.
do it all at once.
Yep.
And you're back there anyway, like, hey, I'm going to go cut some junk trees out of here, like bitternut, or there's a massive amount of locusts, and I want to thin those out. Or if it's black locust, like eradicate them. Well, go get the honeysuckle at the same time. And if it's around the edges, literally, while you're in there, you could literally just, it's not fun. I've done this a million times, though. You could take your chainsaw and just cut them off, and then just treat the tips. Just dab the tips with garland, tordon, glyphosate. I mean, there's a million options there too. And just take care of it at the same time. It's not going to take that much time. And if we're talking 50 acres with edge bush honeysuckle, I mean, we're talking a matter of hours to solve a huge problem that could become a problem that's like, this problem's now a week-long problem or 2 weeks of eradicating that stuff. We're right out of the gate, it's 2 hours. So very, very quick to deal with that. Yeah, I'd be doing that immediately, day one.
And when you're doing that TSI, are you felling most of those trees? Are you girdling them? Let's say some of these hackberries are pretty big, and this is someone that's more inexperienced too, I guess, if you're putting that hat on right now.
All right, inexperienced, double girdle. If you want them dead, hackberry, you can do a single girdle, and then just put some, I like garland, which is tricloper, but it's garland 4, if you look that up, Garlon 4, generics tricloper, and you just put that around the cambium layer that you cut in, so you're cutting in about, say an inch deep, and then you just spray around that. That will kill that tree. Now, I like, with a hackberry, I like to double girdle them and let the shoots come back up, and the deer will kill that tree just because I have enough deer, and that provides more browse. Now, that is not going to work for something like a black locust or something that's going to turn into a nightmare. You need to chemically treat those. Anything that's like invasive, nasty, chemically treat those. I would always like to fell a tree if you can do it safely over double girdling and or chemically treating it. I mean, I'd love to fell the tree because that instantaneously opens that canopy up. And I like it, so if I'm like, hey, there's veneer walnuts over here, if I can fell that tree so I know it's going away from the veneer walnut and it's not going to hit it, and I can immediately put it on the ground, I know that at no point will that tree fall into that veneer walnut or fall into that oak tree. I'm always trying to protect those crop trees. So, and then you just say, well, what can you fell safely? Just figure it out. I mean, if you fell a tree like this, and it were to fall on you, it's not gonna hurt you really. I mean, you start doing stuff that's 12 inches in diameter, yeah, you can get hurt. So you'll figure that out. I would fell anything you can that is not going to hurt you for an inexperienced person. And maybe a point of reference would be like 6 inches and smaller. I like following them better. And then, like I had mentioned to you before, if you do want a hinge cut, a rough idea would be like, hey, I'm going through there on a normal stand. Don't do more than like 1 out of 10 trees you're going to hinge cut. Or just pick little pockets here and there that are like a quarter of an acre or a tenth of an acre, and just do like multiple little pockets. So it's not like this giant gnarly area that you're like, oh my gosh, and nothing can get through there. You're like, did you make this for rabbits? Deer won't go in there. Just make them small. If you want to trash it, that's cool. Just make them really small. So even worst case, a deer are like, no, I can get around this, no problem. It's not giant. So like, the size of anybody's bedroom that's watching, like 3, 4, 5 times that size. We're talking a pretty small area, which would be like 20 trees. Yeah, you can trash that. Yeah, I took everyone down and it was a tangled mess. That's fine. Just don't do it like 2 acres or something. That's crazy.
Okay. Just
very small areas.
What about when you actually chop the trees down? Does it ever get too impassable from doing that?
I don't have that unless I chop down something that I should have treated like a black locust. The only time it's going to be unpassable is if I were to chop the stuff down and an invasive got in there, like bush honeysuckle. I've seen it impassable with bush honeysuckle, or I've seen it impassable many, many, many years later if cedars got in there too thick. And usually cedars aren't going to take over hardwoods, though, so I wouldn't worry about cedars. And then I've seen it where multiflower rose gets in there. So, again, I'm just going to revert back to 2 non-native invasives that I want to take. And if I had to go multiflower rose versus bush honeysuckle is far more problematic. Far more. It will take over your forest. Multiflower rose generally doesn't. Multiflower rose will get into little pockets. We're like, ooh, that pocket's nasty, and then you can go touch it up. It won't generally take over a whole forest. Some people might say I know of examples. It's pretty rare, though, that I've seen it where it literally takes over the whole forest. Bush honeysuckle, on the other hand, I've seen it take over the whole forest. Like, that's all there is. There is no sunlight getting to the floor. There is no new oak trees growing. There's nothing. It totally took over the whole forest. So between those two, just really watch for bush honeysuckle. And multiflower rose is one that I'm just not as concerned about. Mm-hmm. Just if you're like, hey, I got limited time, just pick back at those areas where like, whoa, that multiflower rose got crazy here. And you could spend 2 hours and clean up the areas that I'm talking about, literally with a chainsaw or with like a weed whipper with a blade on it,
yeah,
or with fire, or with a mulcher for a skid steer, or with a backpack sprayer and spray them. I mean, so there's a million ways to deal with that one. Run a little fire through it and spray some of the resprouts later. A million ways to deal with it. Million. Multiflower rose, minor. Bush honeysuckle, major problem. So
one other,
if you're watching for those.
Yeah, one other side tangent on the honeysuckle. Some guys I've seen, they're like, man, I hope my neighbor takes out all the honeysuckle because that's all the cover. What do you say to that guy?
Yeah, if you just did that, just remove the honeysuckle, I wouldn't want to do that. I'd want to do timber stand improvement along with it.
Yeah, it's not a standalone, so it's paired with something else.
I just took out the honeysuckle and I didn't touch the rest of my timber. I didn't get rid of all the junk trees as well. Yeah, you're gonna be in trouble.
Okay.
And those people, if that was your approach, which I would say it's just the incorrect approach for deer reasons, just do sections at a time. If you got 50 acres, your example, and you're worried about, hey, I'm worried the deer won't like this, do like 5 acres a year. And I know it's not quite ideal, and we're trying to knock back invasives. I mean, the governmental answer would be to, no, you eradicate bush honeysuckle at all costs, at all time. Well, some of that cost is going to be your deer hunting. Mm-hmm. You don't want to do that. But there's ways around that, very viable, easy ways around that, where, hey, yeah, I took out all the bush honeysuckle. It's dead. And I also opened the canopy up. I did some hinge cutting. There's all this new growth. There's new forbs and new trees sprouting all over the place. And just keep on the bush honeysuckle so that doesn't come back, and let all the natural things sprout back up. And you're going to have a jungle. And those deer are not going to be pushed over to your neighbor's farm. And I would argue that if you open that canopy up and you let all this new browse come up and you let it get thick with natural things that are in your forest, the deer from your neighbor's farm that's choked out with no browse, nothing to eat, and and not an ideal forest, they're going to come onto your farm. So let him keep all his bush honeysuckle. The only downside of that is
It'll end up
he's constantly putting seeds on.
Yeah.
But you're gonna
Spot treat it.
either way, even if he didn't, they're gonna come in there. Birds drop these things. It's just light maintenance. Once you get rid of the bush honeysuckle, now it's just light maintenance. And especially on 50 acres, this is a matter of a couple hours a year. If you eradicated them once, now I'm gonna go through my forest and find little ones, and I'll spot spray them or cut them off and treat them or whatever you want to do, or light a fire through there. Now it's really, really easy to deal with. But now that my bush honeysuckle's gone and I've got some hinge cutting done and I've got lots of sunlight hitting the floor and I've got natural regeneration of the trees and new woody growth, woody browse, and all the forbs and legumes that come up, yeah, you're going to have an ideal, desirable forest now.
Okay, so step 1, TSI. Step 2, eradicate invasives. Now we're on to the priority number 3 for this brand new spanking farm that you're excited to tackle.
Definitely food. I mean, year 1 is going to be food. And I go into a new farm not expecting to shoot a mature buck. I just plan it. If there's one on there, that's awesome. Sometimes there is, sometimes there is not. So I want food there so I can start protecting the deer, the young deer. That I'm like, I want to shoot mature deer. And like you said in this example, the goal is 4 or 5 year olds. Okay, so I want to protect, therefore I want to protect the 2 and 3 year olds, or whatever, maybe even 1. We're not in Michigan though, so we don't have to protect the 1 year olds in Illinois, hopefully. But the 2 and 3 year olds, I want to protect those. So I want food there. So when the guns are going off and my neighbors are being maniacs, if they were, then I have things on my farm that hold them there. And the amount of travel they do when they have great bedding and food next to it and they're not disturbed, the amount of travel is very minimal. Very minimal if you don't disturb them. Second, you say, hey, there's no food there, or the cover is not ideal, now their travel gets a lot bigger. They have a far bigger range. So what I want to do with 50 acres, if every deer on there had a range like this, it was whatever it was, just half mile. I want to make it shrink down, whatever that is. I just want it shrunk down. So a lot of deer, a handful of deer, you're not going to protect all of them. So you are going to lose some bucks. But I just want to know, like, a handful will stay on my farm during daylight hours and get lucky enough. And they're survival machines. These deer are not that stupid, especially when they get to 3 and 4. They know how to survive pretty effectively. And if you put the odds in their favor by leaving food on your farm and they feel safe there and they have small travel areas, the chances of them going to the neighbor are just diminished substantially. Mm-hmm. So food is key, and diverse food is key. And food during archery, gun, late muzzleloader season to keep them safe is key, because I don't want them going to other places where they're going to get shot. So I'm trying to save those bucks. So therefore, the first year, hey, I don't have a mature buck to hunt, but year 2 and year 3, I definitely will. So that's why I'm doing food, and I'm doing it for nutritional reasons. I want the deer to have optimal nutrition, stuff like that. But I would say it's mainly, year 1, it's mainly a safety reason and starting to build that farm up. Mm-hmm. And a lot of times with a 50-acre farm, if I bought a 50-acre farm, a lot of times it'd be like, for the last 10 years, 20 guys would show up here and they just shot everything out of here. So now it's kind of like, I got to rebuild it. Well, how do you rebuild it? You rebuild it by fixing the habitat and fixing the food and keeping them safe, and unfortunately not letting 20 guys go through there and shoot everything.
Right.
So food is key first year.
Are you taking out the 5 acres FSA tillable to put in food, or are you trying to carve it out of that other growth that maybe you could put into a plot?
It's being left in food.
Okay.
It is. Now, the only reason it's not being left in food is like, hey man, I'm at home eating ramen noodles. I don't have enough money to put gas in my car. Okay. But then you shouldn't be owning 50 acres. Yeah. You shouldn't. So 5 acres, hey, I can get a farmer to pay me And most farmers are going to be like, dude, I don't want to mess with 5 acres.
Right.
And they're usually doing it for a favor. And usually, because I farm and I know what 5 acres looks like, usually they're like, deer ate all my edges anyway. And they don't really want to farm it, so just maximize it for food. I would. Your farm's going to be vastly better off for it. I mean, for hunting reasons, hey, I bought this 50 for hunting. Then absolutely, no doubt in my mind, utilize that 5 acres for food. And it is not about money at this point. And, that's why me buying that 50 acres, it's not about money. Otherwise, if it was about money, I just would have bought a tillable piece. I wouldn't have bought those trees, the timber. Dose it all out. Farm the timber then if it's just about money.
Sure.
It's not. It's not about money. And I guess that's an answer for me, but I would suspect most people would look at it like this who are watching this like, yeah, this isn't about money. This is about my enjoyment. This is about an asset that I have that's meant to be fun in the fall and rewarding in the fall. Then yes, load that 5 acres with food. 100%. Diverse choices.
Diverse choices of food. Okay, so we have
with a grain.
With
a grain if it's 5 acres.
So would 3 acres of that be grain and 2 acres be that other 80-20 mix? Or 80 or
yes.
20-40
I'd say that'd be a very good example. And then if 3 acres of it are grain, I would say if you have a medium to high deer density, you're probably looking at an electric fence. You probably are. You could try it without it. And if you're going to try it without it, I would do soybeans just because your input costs are so much lower. And if you try soybeans and they fail, and I suppose corn too, but soybeans are easier. If your soybeans fail, you still have backup plans because you're planting your soybeans in whatever, let's just say May. And you're like, oh my goodness, it's July. They ate them to the dirt. And I've had this many times. I'll just make them really big. No, they still ate them to the dirt. That's why I just fence them now. I just would. And you got clover next to it and all these other things too that you're like, okay, so they're still getting nutrition. They're not eating the beans, but they still have other things for nutritional reasons. But the fence is not expensive. It's pretty easy to do.
You're doing a hot fence, a hot wire fence?
Yeah, and I've experimented. I'm not an expert with these fences at all, but I've experimented where I'm like, okay, I'll raise them up higher, so I'll do like 3 strands, and one will get to like, I think last year I tried like 5 or 6 feet, and then I had the exterior one where it was 1 strand, or maybe I did 2, so it was 2 layers. And then I left a few of them last year where I did not electrify them just to see if it'd work, and it worked. They didn't jump it.
Okay, so it was just enough deterrence without them being hot.
Yeah, and somebody's going to be like, he said don't electrify it, and they're not, and they're going to have deer all over. So don't hold me liable here. It's just, this was 1-year experiment of not electrifying it, and it did work. But I also made the wires higher, I added more. It's just 1-year experiment.
Okay, all right.
But yeah, I've had them eat into the dirt, but again, I'll just finish that statement off. If they eat them to the dirt, you still have so many backup plans because now you can plant. It's a clean area to go put brassicas in, and then it's a clean area to go add a rye mix later. And any grain field I have, any one that has to do with hunting, if I'm like, hey, I planted an 80-acre cornfield, and I want to leave a little bit for the deer, a little bit, like I'll have a patch. I'll go along the edges and be like, okay, the coons, it's usually the coons, will destroy the edges, and then I'll just bring my drill and I'll just drill right over that corn or spread stuff right over it. And so and it's just a bare stalk. There's no value to it, right? There's no food. So then I just walk through there and seed over it with my red bag spreader, which is fantastic, like rye or brassicas, whatever you want. Anything where it is ravaged for a crop, and soybeans the same way. Like, hey, my first 10 rows, just they're eaten to the dirt. Then I just run the drill over there or spread things with my bag seeder because I want to utilize every square inch of that plot.
Mm-hmm. Okay. So is there anything else year one? I would say someone would probably be tapped out with projects for that first year. Is there anything else that needs to get slated in there before we go to year 2?
I just say this to everybody, and I'll just repeat what I say to all my friends who buy their first farms that just say, what would you do? It's not the right answer. It's just, what would you do? What I would do is do your timber stand improvement like we said with invasives. Do your plots like we said. And the third thing, hunt it light and hunt it smart. And I know that's just a loaded topic, but just don't go pound it. Don't go pound, especially if you're like, and this is a tough one, but there isn't a mature deer in there, and I want to get them to maturity. Okay, don't go just pounding into your farm nonstop when you know there probably isn't a buck you want to shoot in there. Learn it. I mean, I would want to learn that farm. I would want to hunt it so I understood it. Like, oh, they come out over there. And, oh, this spot, I tried this spot over here, and it's not very good. But just don't go pound it so badly that it's pushing the deer out of there, because you're trying to protect them, really. So it's a delicate balance between hunting pressure and trying to protect the deer. And you'll figure that balance out, hopefully. Hopefully most people will figure that balance out. But I do want to learn that farm, because any farm I've ever owned or been on, it takes me 3 years to learn it. And even after 3 years, even 5 years, even the farm I have now that I've had for 12 years, I mean, I'm still changing spots. I'm like, oh, I missed this. They move over here, and I'm still shuffling stands 12 years later. So, but I'd say to have a farm down, like where I understand how the hunting works, I understand how the deer movement works, I understand how to get in and out without getting busted. It takes 3 years to kind of learn the farm. Just bottom line, my long rant there would just don't overdo it the first year when you're trying to protect deer, especially when you're trying to protect deer.
That's great advice. I think people, it's like a shiny new toy. They want to hunt the heck out of it because it's brand new. But it's something that everyone has worked for, to have, you know, quote unquote control over their first farm or their own farm, and then they turn into their own worst enemy year 1, year 2, and then that's something.
Discipline.
That's what. Yeah, discipline. That's what it is. Yeah.
Light.
Yes.
Light.
Less is more.
Go easy.
Uh-huh.